Okay, so we need to talk about carbon atoms and how they make organic molecules. We're also going to add in carbohydrates and lipids in this section, so it's a little bit longer, but that's okay. You've had some pretty short things of notes to take, so that's not a big deal. So you can see the objectives here. We need to learn the properties of carbon that make it the central component of organic compounds. You'll see that, and then the difference between, or the relationship between polymers and macromolecules. Polymers are just really long monomers. Has nothing to do with my name, unfortunately. Uh, so polymers are a whole bunch of individual things called monomers that are put together, and you'll see how that out this section. So first, carbon. Now you guys already know that carbon can form four covalent bonds, right? Because carbon has four valence electrons on it. We've talked about that before. We've talked about how it can make single bonds between two things. It can make double bonds, and it can make triple bonds. It can share lots and lots of electrons. Now, hydrocarbons are things that are just made up of a bunch of carbons with hydrogens on them. So it'd be like carbon, 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 like this, and then a bunch of hydrogens to make all four bonds happen. Hydrogen, 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 hydrogen. And that's what a hydrocarbon is. Very, very simple, just like what it says. It can be branched. It could branch off and have other, instead of a hydrogen here, there could be another carbon coming off this way. I can make this a carbon, right? And this could keep going forever and ever. Lots of lots of carbons, lots of hydrogens. That's why it's called a hydrocarbon. Now here's another example of one. Here's one that is just a long one with all single bonds. Here's one with double bonds. There's a shorter one. Now the shape of the molecule, when we're talking about science, we've said about this over and over again. The shape of things determine what its functions are. So shape always determines function. Right? And so that's the same thing with these organic molecules. Hydrocarbons, since they're just a bunch of carbons with hydrogens on them, there's no polar regions on them. There's nothing ionic about it. There's nothing. There's no need for electrons or to be clustered anywhere. So it's very hydrophobic. Hydrophobic. It's very non. That's supposed to be an N, not an H. So it's non-polar. Right? There's nothing ionic in there at all. So it's very hydrophobic. Means it does not like water. Right? Does not like water. Now you'll replace some of these sometimes. Some of these things get replaced with other things called functional groups. These are things that replace these hydrogens. That was supposed to be a H, but I changed my mind. Right? I left one blank right there. So right here, instead of a hydrogen being there, maybe all of a sudden there's an oxygen there. Right? If there's an oxygen there, there's going to be a lot of electrons, and it's going to change the characteristics of it. It's no longer going to be necessarily nonpolar. It might actually become hydrophilic. It might become ionic in some ways, right? So there's these functional groups change this very neutral backbone into something that's very useful. Here's a bunch of pictures of them. The pictures aren't very clear, but you can see here, this right here is a functional group. This right here is a functional group. This right here, those are all functional groups. Anything on the carbons except hydrogen becomes a functional group. Right? Right there. Lots of functional groups there in these amino acids. Amino acids are in a little bit. Now, polymers are those big long chains, right? Big long chains of carbon. Right? They can be broken down into the monomers by something called hydrolysis. Right? Hydrolysis reactions. Hydro, we know means water. Hydro is water. Lysis, which we haven't said a lot of, but we will eventually, means to break. So hydrolysis or hydrolysis means we're breaking water. So water molecules get broken apart. We have to add water molecules to break them apart so that they can break down these polymers. Now when the monomers, the single ones, these single ones right here, join together to make these big long ones, it's called a condensation reaction. And that's because water is actually produced. Water comes out of these reactions, right? And it's just like condensation on the side of your cup. Now in these ones, as we're taking them apart, we actually put water in there to break them apart. Pictures here for you. Here you go. So condensation reaction is taking these two right here, these two right here, and going this way. That's the condensation reaction. And when we do that, we make water. Now the opposite way is hydrolysis. We have to add water to this, and it breaks it apart. You can see here's the parts of the water. Right. So the water got broken apart in hydrolysis, breaking water. Those carbohydrates, one of the most important, well, they're all important, but whatever, macromolecules. So what you need to learn how to do, or be able to do in this one is, I don't know why I'm changing colors here, but I will just for fun. Put some purple in there. That sounds kind of cool, doesn't it? Yay, purple. So we're going to distinguish between monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Now you can see they're all the same except for what? The prefix right there. Mono, di, and poly. Hopefully you already know what those mean. Mono means one, di means two, and poly means many. If you do that, you've got it made. Now there's some of these polysaccharides that are used as storage for energy, and some of them are used as structural molecules to help support the structure of something. There we go. I'm going to make a big bright blue one. Okay. Playing around with my iPad. It's kind of fun. So carbohydrates. Carbohydrates. It looks like we got carbon and hydrate, okay, which means there's always carbon and water. Carbohydrates. It's always CH2O is the general form of them. What you'll see one later is glucose, one that we need to know. It's C6H12O6. Multiply this whole thing by 6 here, we get 6 there. 2 times 6 is 12, and the 6 there. So it uses that same format of CH2O. So now carbohydrates can be made out of one sugar, which is monosaccharide, two sugars, which are disaccharides, or many, which are polysaccharides. That's just knowing some construction of words there and knowing what those mono, di, and poly means. Should be pretty easy. Monosaccharides can be anywhere from 3 to 7 carbons. Right? There's a hydroxyl group, which sounds very much like the thing we talked about when we did pH, which was hydroxide. Well, that's because it's exactly like that. Hydroxide is an OH negative. Right? When we add that as a functional group, the negative goes away and it just becomes a hydroxyl group. One carbon is double bonded to an oxygen. That looks like this. Double bond to an oxygen, that's a carbonyl group. You don't need to know the names of those, though. You should know the hydroxyl group when you see that. So common monosaccharides, trioses, right? If it's made out of 3 carbons, pentoses have 5 carbons, and hexoses have 6 carbons. So this is 3 carbons, 5 carbons, and 6 carbons. And you're going to use a lot of these when we get into different functions or things that go on in cells. So glucose is a huge one. Ribose and deoxyribose, those are ones that we need for DNA. And glyceride, that's one that really is involved in cellular respiration. When we get to that. Here's some pictures of them. You can see these are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. They usually make these ring structures. Right? You can see them written out like that. These hydrogen oxygens get flipped around. That's for when you get to biochemistry. Don't worry about that stuff right now. This one looks like a 5, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oop, 5 right there, yeah. See? Pentose. So glucose. Again, this thing is doing this crazy. I don't know why. Should look like that with those as prefixes, or sorry, as subscripts. Glucose is the most abundant monosaccharide, and it's used as an energy source. Hopefully we know that's why we have glucose. Now, homeostasis, again, here we are with that name again, homeostasis. What's it do? It maintains our internal conditions. Well, we have one that maintains the level of glucose in our blood. If you've lost that ability, you're called a diabetic, like me. So, diabetic if you've lost that homeostatic mechanism to maintain your blood glucose. Disaccharides are when you have 2 monosaccharides joined together. Now, when they're joined together, it's called a glycosidic linkage. You saw that in the thing we did in class last class. Some common ones, Maltose is two glucoses. Sucrose, the one that we have on our table all the time, that's a glucose and a fructose, right? That's the glucose we use as energy, and fructose is the one that we usually get from fruit. We think of that most of the time. Lactose is a glucose and a galactose, two different ones. And here is some disaccharides. This is glucose and fructose being put together to make sucrose. Now this is making water, right? Water's coming out of this, so it's a condensation reaction or dehydration synthesis. Polysaccharides. Now these things are just getting bigger and bigger. We started out as a monosaccharide, then a disaccharide. Now we have them so long that they're just called polysaccharides. And the most common ones are starches. Those are energy storage in plants. Right? Potatoes have tons and tons of starch in them. Glycogen, that's what we use when we have a bunch of glucose in our body. We want to store it. We store it as glycogen. And then cellulose. Cellulose is a structural polysaccharide, so it's very similar to these other ones that were used for energy, but this is what helps give the plant its rigidity and its shape, structure. So starch is a form of carbohydrate used for energy storage in plants, right? We get that from eating. We eat our starches, right? We eat our potatoes and breads, whatever. Starch has two different chains, amylose, or different forms, sorry. Amylose and amylopectin. This one has, it's unchained. That means it just goes carbon, 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 carbon like that. Actually, it goes glucose, 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 whatever. This one means it's branched, so it'll come along like this, and then there'll be some branches coming off. And they store their starch in things in the cells called amyloplasts. Here's how starch is made. Here you see all these monosaccharides becoming polysaccharides. ATP and ADP is something we'll talk about later. That's a form of energy. It's a very important molecule. But you can see it's going from 1 to 2 to 3 to getting. Glycogen is in which we store our energy. We take a bunch of glucose subunits, link them all together. It's similar to the plant starch, but much more branching in it. And we store it in our liver and in our muscle cells, which this is just, it's not a really intuitive place for us to think of it, but muscle cells should kind of make sense. Well, yeah, that's when we need energy, we need it right there, so we can keep it in our muscle cells. Here's a picture of glycogen. Crazy looking, isn't it? Here's all the branching going off, all the branching like this. Here's this one's going this way, but up here it branches off this way. This one branches this way. A little farther down here it branches off that way. Stuff in glycogen. Cellulose is the one that plants use as fibers. That's what we eat is fiber. We don't digest this. We don't digest it very well. So what we do is we eat it, and it helps us maintain regular bathroom visits. Right? If somebody's constipated, they tell them, "Hey, eat some more fiber," and that's what that is right there. There's a picture of it. It's all chained and put together. It's crazy. Lipids. So lipids are a really interesting one. This has a really wide range of stuff. Usually the most common thing we think about as lipids is fats, but really our bodies have lots, all of our cells have tons and tons of phospholipids, which we'll talk about, and also steroids, which usually get a bad name, but there's some very important things about steroids that we need to know. So lipids, they are nonpolar, they're hydrophobic. You should know that. If you just think of lipids as fats, right, or oils, then you know, ooh yeah, they don't like water, so they're definitely hydrophobic. Definitely hydrophobic. Very few oxygens. Not many oxygens. Lots of carbon and hydrogen. That's why they're very hydrophobic. There's a bunch of different types. There's the fats, like I said, phospholipids, which we'll talk about in membranes. Carotenoids, those are pigments. They give colors like yellow and orange, especially to fruits and vegetables. Steroids and waxes. We'll talk about all those things a little bit. And they're used for a lot of energy storage. Also structural components and important hormones, which are signaling things. So steroids are in our cell membranes is a structural thing, but they're also kind of not really a hormone, but they're used in signaling. Triglycerides. This is the one you always hear about, fats. These are the ones that like to kill us, right? Triglycerides or fats. Most abundant lipid in living things uses a fuel source. It's made of a glycerol that's joining 3 fatty acids. That's why it's called a triacylglycerol, or triglyceride. We usually leave that acyl off when we're talking about it in health or in nutrition class. So glycerol is just a 3-carbon alcohol which has 3 of these OH groups, right? Hydroxyls or hydroxide groups. The fatty acids are the really long chains. They're going to look like this. They're going to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And you'll see a picture of it. Now, bam, there it is. Okay, this right here is the glycerol. And these are the 3 fatty acids. 3 chains of fatty acids. Right. Very, very long chains, and 3 of them. We can see that these all have single bonds. That means there's the absolute max number of hydrogens that can be there. Those are saturated ones. So we have saturated fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids, and you hear about those when you hear about food. Right? So saturated ones, they have the absolute maximum number of hydrogens that they can have. Unsaturated would mean that there's some double bonds in there, so it's not fully filled with hydrogens. Right? This one means lots and lots and lots of hydrogens, as many as possible. This one means not quite as many as possible. This is in animal fat and solid vegetable oil. Now, since these have as many hydrogens as possible and no double bonds, their structure is very, very flat like this, which means the next one can come along and stack up right next to it. And that's why it ends up usually being a solid. These ones right here kind of go like this. There'll be 3 of these, but then there'll be these double bonds, and these double bonds cause bends. Well, that means that the other ones can't really line up so well and get all solid, and it actually stays a liquid at room temperature. So if you see a solid fat, it's a saturated fat. If you see a liquid, you get oils out of a jar or something, that's unsaturated fats. Tubs of grease, those are saturated. So saturated, unsaturated. I guess I didn't know we'd need to go back to the other slide. Unsaturated fats, there's monounsaturated fats, right? They have 1 double bond, and there's polyunsaturated, which have a whole bunch of double bonds. So that should make sense. Mono, unsaturated. Well, unsaturated means it has a double bond. Mono means 1 double bond. Right? Should be stuff there. Now, phospholipids are amphipathic. Amphipathic. That's a very, very important word. It means they like water and don't like water at the same time. It means they're kind of crazy. Water at the same time. Which means they have part of them are hydrophilic and another part is hydrophobic. And that's what makes our cell membranes work so well, is because they have a hydrophobic part and a hydrophilic part. So they're amphipathic is what that means, or that's the word for that. Okay. So for phospholipids, what it has is it has a little head because it's a little circle, and then it has these little tails coming down. This part is the hydrophilic. That's the hydrophilic. In fact, here, let me change it to blue because it likes water. This part right here does not like water. So this is the hydrophobic tail, and this is the hydrophilic head right there. Now, like I said, they're very important in cell membranes, and when we get to that section in the next chapter, you'll see how important that really is. Carotenoids, like I said, are pigments that we get in our fruit and vegetables, especially orange and yellow plants. Most of us are able to convert those to vitamin A, which is a very important. And then steroids, the one that, steroids, everybody says is bad. A steroid isn't necessarily like testosterone. There's cholesterol is a steroid. Cholesterol is actually it's good and bad, right? We need to have steroids. We need to have cholesterol as a steroid. Here's a list of them right here. There's cholesterol, there's bile salts, which are used to help us digest fat when we eat a lot of fat. Reproductive hormones, those are the steroids. Those are the ones we think of, like testosterone and estrogen. Sorry, I couldn't think of that one. And then lots of other hormones that we need to have. So plant cells have molecules that are kind of like cholesterol, but not really. They're a little bit different. Right. So those are the lipids and the carbohydrates. Hopefully I didn't take too long to do that presentation. I know there's a lot of stuff there, but you guys got off easy before with nice, easy notes, so figured to give you a little more challenging stuff. You guys are big kids now anyways, right? Okay, I'll talk to you later. Bye.